Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here at Global Fact 8. Like many other speakers have said, I too wish we were in Norway, but it's great to be here virtually. I'm Angie Drobnic Holan. I'm editor-in-chief of Politifact. We're among the largest fact-checking organizations in the United States. And I will be your host and moderator today for our panel, Fact-Checking When Democracy is Under Threat. I'm going to get to introductions of our panel in just a few minutes. But first, I wanted to tell you a little bit about why I thought this was an important topic for us to talk about as fact checkers. As many of you know, the past few years have been quite challenging. If you saw Claire Wardle's keynote opening on the first day of the conference, I think she hit a lot of the key points that many fact checkers have been facing. There's so much to fact check. It seems like misinformation is proliferating, and we've been busier than ever. An additional challenge is that in many of our countries, it feels as if democracy is under threat. Here at Politifact, we started in 2007, inspired by excesses of political rhetoric and political campaigning. We wanted to fact check what the politicians were saying and bring accuracy and authoritative information to people who were trying to decide how to vote in the elections. But in the years since we started, I have to say, especially this year, it feels like things might be getting worse instead of better. In the United States, we have traditionally had a two-party system of conservative Republicans, more liberal Democrats, but they often shared a good bit of space in the center. We've seen that changing in these past several election cycles. And I think it really culminated in 2016 when Donald Trump challenged Hillary Clinton for the presidency. And against all expectations, Trump won the election. And with him, Trump brought a strain of what I would call anti-evidence, anti-science bias to his rhetoric. And I don't think I need to go into too lengthy of an explanation, but Donald Trump as a president was very fact challenged, and we had to fact check him constantly. Then the 2020 election, Trump lost to Democrat Joe Biden and immediately began attacking the results of the election. And for me as a fact checker, this was a real turning point. We never had to fact check election results the way we did in 2020. And the proliferation of misinformation about that election culminated in the January 6th insurrection when people attacked the Capitol. So that sets the scene along with an international pandemic. It's been a little tough for the fact checkers lately. So I was thinking about all of this as Global Fact approached, and I thought it would be really good to bring some fact checkers together, because I know the United States is not the only country where it feels like democracy is under threat, and we're having to fact check the basic mechanics of elections and governance. So as I introduce the panel, I've asked all of them to explain to us, an audience of international fact checkers, a little bit about what they've been seeing and what the political situation is like in their own countries. And as we go around the panel, we'll do that, and then we'll dig even deeper into these very important questions. So I'd like to start with Pawel Terpilowski, editor-in-chief of Demagog, the first Polish fact-checking organization. Pawel, tell us what's going on in Poland right now. What are you seeing as a fact checker?
Well, for us in Poland, first of all, we are going deeply in our fourth wave of pandemic. So I think this is something that truly matters in the grand scale of things. And it also influences the political discourse and also misinformation in what we are dealing with, what are the claims, we have to fact check. But also speaking of specifics of rule of law, we have some discussion, I would say that with European Commission, we have some issues and questions about rule of law in Poland and the independence of judiciary. And this is a very important matter that I think overwhelms currently the political landscape and what our politicians are talking about. And it's also very challenging matter, because I think that in a lot of ways those questions, those issues are very hard to fact check. And on the very basic level, what is the rule of law? How do we define it? What are the facts in terms of such opinion-based really matters? So we as fact checkers are constantly in Poland dealing with the question of what is actually eligible to fact check in those circumstances, in those highly also politicized matter, because as IFCN member, we have to stay objective. We have to don't take sides on those issues, those questions, and it's very easy to be perceived as anti-government if you're fact checking the government and saying that they are wrong in one case or another in terms of such an important matter for the government. So for us, it's very challenging in terms of actually what are we able to fact check and what not. What can we do? So this is very those are issues that we have to deal on the editorial basis, on the editorial level, and it goes like way beyond the actual fact checking.
Thank you, Pawel. That's very interesting. I think rule of law is a great topic that we can get into more. Next, let's go to Rita, Head of Strategy and Community Engagement at EOS Fatos, the well-known fact-checking organization from Brazil. Anna, give us the picture in Brazil, please.
Hi, everyone. Thank you a lot for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here in the Global Fact. Well, I listened to Pawel. It's really interesting to recognize the same concerns and the same problems between countries that are so different. Well, here in Brazil, when we started in 2015, it was already a very critical moment in Brazilian politician scenario, because we were discussing the impeachment of the president then, Dilma Rousseff. And during the last 3 years, half of Fatos' existence, we saw digital harassment against us getting really worse, and we faced coordinated hate campaigns targeting press and targeting fact checkers, and even journalists individually. And an important mark to all this situation was the election of the actual president, Bolsonaro, in 2018. So he and his government constantly attacked the press during the election, even before, and especially after he he got elected. And for example, the president blocked us, as Fatos account on Twitter, so officially we cannot read his tweets. And he also blocked the other at least 10 publishers, I guess. And we also saw like the Presidential Communication Board producing social network material against what press published or what fact checkers checked. So here in EOS Fatos, we are trying to think different ways to fight against disinformation that we see in social network, but especially to investigate this phenomenon that we are seeing in the last 3 years of this institutionalization of the disinformation campaigns. Now, we are not only seeing politicians lying, We are seeing them finance disinformation campaigns or using disinformation campaigns to disguise the governmental problems. We saw it a lot during the pandemic when we had clearly here in Brazil a not very good situation. We were like the 30th country with more deaths, so per million, if you count per million. So this is the scenario in Brazil, summarizing. This is what the top challenge we are facing now. We had a government that finance and helps disinformation to be spread.
That's very challenging, Anna, when the government seems to be the source of disinformation, sometimes a place we would turn to for authoritative information. It's very challenging. Our next
and I'm sorry. No, I was just wanting to compliment, because when we see disinformation come from the government, it's also tricky to know how to. It's what Pawel said. It's sometimes tricky to how to show that the government is spreading a disinformation and not appear to be someone who is against the government or who is partidarized. And this is really impose a difficult challenge to fact check.
All right. Next, we will go to Veronika Munk, founder and editor-in-chief of TELEX, one of the very few Hungarian independent online news dailies. TELEX is based on crowdfunding and has about 600,000 readers a day. Welcome, Veronika. Tell us about the situation in Hungary.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm also coming from a country where the misinformation and disinformation is usually coming from the government and from the political sphere. As an independent journalist who has been worked in Hungary for decades and who experienced a politically influenced takeover at my newspaper where I used to work, I can assure you that the free press in my country, in Hungary, with the population of 10 million people in Central Europe, is in a very, very bad shape. And the reason of this is the political influence. So the Hungarian media landscape basically has fractured into two distinct parts. There are outlets which linked to the governing Fidesz party, and there are others, very few of them which are independent of it. And independent journalists and independent outlets not only have to struggle to maintain an economic basis for our work, but we also have to fight to access for information. And this economic situation is the reason why in Hungary there is not a single fact-checking organization. So basically, fact-checking is the function of fact-checking is fulfilled by the still remaining independent outlets, which are basically only online. So in Hungary, people who are not consuming their news on the internet, living outside of cities or living in villages, or elderly people, they do not have any other option consuming the facts, so-called facts, or consuming the news only from media outlets, which are basically propaganda outlets of the government. And the problem is that also the public broadcasting companies funded by Hungarian taxpayers are also mouthpieces for the government broadcasting propaganda. And the advertisement market is also heavily influenced by politics. So the still remaining independent outlets like TELEX, my organization also, we have a lot of work to fulfill basically the public service media function and fact-checking the misinformation and disinformation which is coming from either the political actors or the large amount of propaganda outlets that exist in my country.
Thank you, Veronika. We will be accepting questions from the audience, so please feel free to submit your questions, and the tech team behind the scenes will forward them to us. Pawel, I'm going to come back to you. Anna and Veronika both mentioned something that I think is really important and that we deal with, which is being perceived as independent. So when you're fact checking the government, being perceived as an independent journalist and not as an opponent, just another political opponent of the government. This is something that we wrestled with constantly during the Trump administration, and now we even continue with his supporters of telling people, no, we're not out to get your leader. We're just trying to give the facts. And we've seen mixed results with our efforts there. Have you experienced this, and what do you think has worked well and what hasn't worked?
Absolutely. This is the case also for us in Poland, for us at Demagog as well. But it's also a very interesting one, because on the one hand, we have to rely on like government data in terms of COVID-19 pandemic. We are fact checking many claims that needs to be consulted with some state institutions, which is putting us in a way, in a position of pro-government, because we are, trying to have people vaccinated, for instance, and this is perceived by some personas, by some groups, especially anti-vaccine groups, as pro-governmental approach, that we are promoting government propaganda. But on the other hand, we have also this issue that I think that most of independent organizations have to deal with, that we are the Soros guys, and so on. So this is a question of showing people the real scope of our work, because most of those cases are like, why aren't you fact checking this or that? Why have you ever fact checked some other guy? And we are actually showing them that yes, we are not left wing or right wing. We can show evidence that the fake news, for instance, the disinformation in terms of COVID-19 pandemic is so much more spread than and so much more diverse than only one party or one political side is doing it. So I think that you have to, the work has to speak for yourself, and if you rely on the principles that we all share and we all commit to in the IFCN, I think it shows us the evidence of our work that we have.
Thanks, Pawel. Anna, what have you seen as successes or not so successful in trying to show the audience EOS Fatos independence? What do you think has worked well?
It's really funny to talk about it, because when we fact check something that is pro-government, for example, a lie that someone's talking about the president, and suddenly we have a new audience that's starting to share content, say, look, even the left checkers are saying this is false. So it's really interesting to see that they rely on us when it's something that's in favor of the government, but then when it's something against, how do you fact check? The main question that we are trying to solve is to show people, because during the pandemic, people, the common comments we saw in our social network was, who are you to say that vaccines doesn't kill people? Where did you graduate to say those claims? And then we had to try to, we produced some videos to try to just show the method that we used to fact check something. And this was partially successful, but when you are in such a polarized ambience, it's really hard to because people are not discussing methods, they are discussing their passions, their blind support to a political side. And it's really something that it's really hard to as press, as journalists, as fact checkers, to solve that question, that when you have such a big social problem, I think what we can do as fact checkers, and what we are trying to do here in Brazil, it's when we had, for example, during the pandemic, the government was trying to produce this narrative that everything was fine in Brazil. So they started to use a data that's about people who recovered from COVID-19. And they, I think, despite the many concerns about what is someone who recovered of COVID-19, the main problem was that in one moment, the government decided to went down the health minister website. So, I mean, the part where they published the COVID-19 data. And the press started, the fact checkers started showing light and draw attention to the fact that the health minister's website was down, that the data was stopping to be released. And we start saying, no, this is important. This data is important. This is important to show where we really are at the pandemic. And after all the press draw attention to that matter, and also after a Supreme Court decision, they put the website again online and starts to showing the data. But we realized that we need to show, I mean, we were successfully showing the importance to the data be fully disclosure by the government, but we was not that successful to stop the narratives that started to get strong about how the data are not very trustable, that probably the press is producing it. So all this mess, websites went down, coming back, helped to this narrative against data to get strong. So it's not always win-win game. Sometimes we win, sometimes we lose this fight against disinformation, especially in this very polarized moment that we are facing in Brazil, we are facing in Poland, and we're facing in Hungary.
Yeah, I get that feeling too, that some of our tactics to show our work and our independence, some of them work, and some of them just, the people who are attacking us just don't want to hear it. And what you mentioned about how they'll trumpet your findings when they agree with them, but when they disagree with your findings, they attack you. I mean, that is where it really feels like there's some sort of information warfare going on, and unfortunately, the fact checkers are the targets of it. Veronika, I'm curious what you think about this conversation so far, and we also have a question from the audience for you. They ask, would it make sense to have something outside of Hungary to do fact checking in Hungary, so you are safe and you can do your duty?
Actually, the situation is that in Hungary, journalists and fact checkers are not being put to prison or not being killed, what happened in other countries. So we need to express that it's a possibility, but it's not the case in Hungary. In Hungary, the case is it's basically almost impossible to get answers if you are working for a critical media outlet. And I'm saying critical and I'm saying independent, and I mean it because the government like to title the independent outlets as oppositional ones or lefty newspapers, not just to create this narrative that the media is somehow the enemy in the political sphere. And I think it's really important to emphasize that our main value is our impartiality and our belief in the facts. And I don't think that would be a solution to go to another country and work from there, because that's not the problem. The problem is that if we send the question to any ministries in Hungary, basically we just documented in the last year that I think for 3 months that we how many questions we send in to Hungarian ministries, and I don't know, in 3 months we sent in 50 questions to different ministries and authorities in very different topics, and we only get 9 answers, and those 9 answers was like not really meaningful answers. Sometimes they just said that we cannot comment on this or something like that. But what we can do, that we can have a really wide range of background sources. And the other thing what we do, and I think it's a really successful strategy, that we go there personally with video cameras and we ask the politicians and the authorities on the street. Sometimes when they go to governmental meetings, we just there with our videographers, and they stop them and they ask questions. Sometimes they running from the journalists. Sometimes they put a cordon in front of the journalists who try to ask the questions. So the situation requires some creativity, but we try to do our best. And there are a lot of sorry, just one more thing regarding the COVID situation, because I think that is also really unique in Hungary, that during the COVID, the second wave and the third wave of the pandemic, for hospital directors, for doctors, for nurses, it was not allowed to talk to journalists. It was forbidden, basically, and we did not get any on the record type of comments from any health officials. And they said that they wanted to talk to us. They wanted to say that how horrible is the situation in the hospitals, and how the situation is much worse, that the state communication the government is communicating, and they told everything in background interviews, but we could not use those with their names and with their titles in it. So yeah, it's especially in the pandemic, the informational function of the media is especially important, when many still insist that the virus is just a hoax, and so our function as fact checkers and media professionals, we just need to keep doing what we do, and we need to provide fact-based information for the Hungarian public.
Yeah, I think just speaking for myself, it seems like any citizen of a country who is doing journalism would want to try and stay in their country, if at all possible. But I should note, we do have a fact-checking signatory, Factnama, that has been fact-checking Iran from Canada, and has been very successful. And I've always been hopeful that one day we'll have a fact-checking organization that will fact-check China. And that would probably have to be done from outside the country, but we'll see. I have a really great question from the audience, just to switch gears for a minute. This viewer says, very important discussion. I hope you will also raise the role of the polarizing social media platforms and the way they are used in good and bad ways in your respective countries. Anna, do you want to take that one first? What do you see with the social media platforms in Brazil?
Well, when we're talking about disinformation getting institutionalized, I mean, starting to be spread by politicians. For example, now we have this partnership with Facebook and fact checkers, but we are not allowed to signalize political content as false, content that was spread by politicians as false. So this is a big issue when we are saying that the politicians are the ones who are spreading disinformation. Here in Brazil, it was clear. For example, I have just a fresh example. Yesterday, our president, he do like weekly lives on Facebook, and he was saying that United Kingdom produced reports saying people who get vaccinated get AIDS. And we just fact-checked one day before, that this is completely false. I mean, there is no report from United Kingdom showing anything relating vaccines and AIDS. And so it's completely out of nowhere. And we cannot signalize on Facebook platform that this content, the video where he say this kind of thing, is completely false. So the platforms somehow are helping, like thinking ways to analyze and to punish disinformation spreaders, but they really need to know how. They don't know, or they don't want to know how to deal with politicians who are really spreading disinformation. Here in Brazil, we have YouTube put down some videos from politicians who are spreading disinformation about false medicines used to COVID with no proof against COVID-19. But we still have a lot of content produced by politicians that we as fact checkers already checked it. We showed this one is the one who produced the disinformation, and they are still there on social network for anyone who wants to share or see. Or so I think the social media platforms need to address these problems when politicians are starting to spread. What we saw with Trump, it really also shows some disparity of what that platforms sometimes are harder with Americans. Politicians sometimes has fast tools to fight disinformation on USA, where they're from, but really slow to share the same tools or the same policies to other countries, like Brazil, like Poland, like Hungary.
Yeah,
I think.
I hope everybody who's interested in this topic has been able to read the recent investigations from the Wall Street Journal on the Facebook files, because it does get it. The United States gets the best possible Facebook that exists, and then the other countries get less monitoring of misinformation, less policing of the platform. In the US, the politicians are also exempt from the fact-checking program, and we find that very frustrating. We've raised it many times with Facebook. With these recent news reports and Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower, I'm very curious to see if Facebook is going to continue giving special treatment to politicians, even when they spread misinformation that's verifiably false. Anna, go ahead.
No, just we recently talked to all the platforms to know what they are thinking, how they are preparing themselves to Brazilian election next year, presidential election. And they are pretty much wanting to do the same they did 4 years ago. So this is really, and we have a problem here in Brazil that now we had a lot of politicians using Telegram, the Russian message app, and we never reached anyone from Telegram. I mean, even the election justice is trying to reach representatives from Telegram to talk, to know their policies to election, and we never receive a mail, or they had a bot to talk on Telegram to talk to the press, and they never contested or answered any of our questions. So we also had this big blind spot that we don't know what to do, and how Telegram will be used to spread this information on the next election in Brazil.
Yeah. Pawel, go ahead.
I just want to mention that I think there is a very important issue that is dilemma between freedom of speech and disinformation in terms of social media, because we are seeing it in Poland that misinformation actors very often try to establish their narrative that, you know, what they're actually doing is just a freedom of speech, and we as fact checkers who work for Facebook are basically doing censorship. And this is very important thing to discuss, because we personally believe that freedom of speech doesn't entitle to the freedom for, you know, freedom of lie and freedom to spread disinformation. And this is important question and issue because we are seeing it in Poland, but also on the EU level as well, that there are efforts on the, you know, projects being made in terms of law to try to, you know, influence the fact-checking programs and to try to, you know, effectively maybe even ban fact-checking from Facebook platform. I'm sure that some of you may know about the DSA proposal amendment that is being pushed by in the EU, and we also have a project that is currently in the works in Poland that, you know, effectively establishes so-called Council of Free Speech, so to speak, that it will reconsider all types of moderating content on all social media platforms regarding if it violates the Polish law or not. So, you know, the government will try, if it passes, actually, it will try to, you know, assess if it's violating the law or not. So this is very troublesome for us, very worrying. That, you know, the work that we are trying to do, and we all know that, you know, Facebook is so full of misinformation already that our efforts are not nearly enough of what should be done, that even those things can be put in jeopardy for the future.
Veronika, what are you seeing on the pluses and minuses of the social media platforms?
In Hungary, like Pawel's, I share Pawel's attitude regarding the freedom of speech and the connection of the social media platforms. What we see in Hungary that the politicians use the social media very cleverly and widely to spread conspiracy theories or misinformation or disinformation regarding their oppositional parties or regarding journalists or media organizations. So they're using very creatively, but according to the EU law or according to the Hungarian law itself, it's just not possible to intervene if they spread these fake or false theories and informations on the social media level. But the Hungarian elections are coming next spring, and the campaign, just the primaries happened a couple of weeks last week. It was ended, and we've seen that this is gonna be a very big thing in Hungary in the next national elections, that basically the political sphere is communicating their misinformation and conspiracy theories on the social media, and people consuming those without basically critical knowledge, and it's gonna be a large problem at the elections next year.
Yeah, I think that reversal of rhetoric where they call fact checkers censors and and they say that their misinformation is freedom of speech. I think those are real issues for when we have a public discussions about what kind of information is encouraged or discouraged in the public square. And we've seen authoritarian rulers in other countries go after journalists and accuse them of being purveyors of fake news when it's like the opposite of what's real. I want to ask one question. We only have a few minutes left, about 5 minutes left, but as a fact-checking organization, how do you encourage your staff during these challenging times? What are the best strategies and advice you would have for other fact checkers who are working under challenging conditions or feeling like we're having to check the same basic things over and over? We have to fact check the same crazy conspiracy theories over and over. What gives your organization hope and the drive to continue this important work? Let me go to Veronika first.
Yeah, I think it's an easy job and a hard job as well, because the easy side is that if you're working in a challenging environment as a journalist, you're working with colleagues who passionately believe in this profession and who passionately believe in that every democracy needs its factual based information provided to the public. The other hand, of course, it's frustrating when journalists do not get answers for their questions, or they cannot reach the data what they are needed for their fact checking. And sometimes they say that why I send these requests, because I know that they will never answer. And I say that, okay, but this is the job and you need to do it, because we need to function like we would live in a normal world. But as I mentioned, I think there are no other journalists who work for an independent outlet in Hungary. Everybody is passionately believe in the importance of their job. So basically, my answer is that it's easy to keep being motivated, because we know that we are working on the right side.
Pawel, what do you say?
Demagog has risen as an organization based on volunteers, and although we have come a long way and we are now very much professionalized, we still do work with volunteers that we recruit on social media platforms, that we basically say that, if you are maintaining some very basic principles, you can become a fact checker. And we still see that people are willing to do this, and they inspire us with some great ideas, with great knowledge, background, expertise, different experiences. And each time we do such a recruitment, and we gather more and more people from whole country, we like get those ideas, and we provide them and we expand them, and it's a very, very positive way of communicating with one another. And for me, at least, it's very inspiring and refreshing experience to do.
That's great. Anna, final thoughts? We're almost out of time.
Well, I really agree with Veronika. You need some kind of passion to still be working with fact checking. And I think we try to celebrate small victory. I mean, just yesterday we were mentioned in an investigation in the Congress that's trying to fight the disinformation about pandemic that being spread by the government. And also try new ideas. I mean, not just to do the fact checking, but I mean, how explore new formats to do your fact checking, how to fact checking using video or animation, or I don't know. I mean, trying new ideas. It's a way to stimulate and the journalists to keep keep. We have an expression here in Brazil. Sometimes we feel we are drying ice, and you're trying to do a job that's going nowhere. But when you explore new ideas, sometimes you can see like a light in the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. This has been so inspiring, and I hope everybody has a great Global Fact 8. Thanks, everybody.